I still don't talk about that morning much. People ask me how the holiday was, and I say it was fine, lovely city, nice weather, and then I change the subject. Because the truth doesn't fit into a quick answer. The truth takes a while, and it usually leaves the room very quiet. But you asked, so I'll tell it the way I remember it, slowly. The way it actually happened, not the way the news squeezed it into 90 seconds that night. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because my wife had circled it on the little paper map the hotel gave us. Tuesday was meant to be the easy day. No museums, no queues, no big plans. Just the park, a coffee, and a slow walk past Whitstone Palace to watch the guards. That was the whole plan. Watch the guards, take a few photos, maybe buy our daughter one of those overpriced toy soldiers from the gift cart. That was it. That was the whole dangerous plan we had that morning. Watch men stand still in red coats. Funny how life works. The city was beautiful that day, I'll give it that. One of those mornings where the light comes in low and gold and makes everything look like a postcard somebody touched up too much. The grass in Cresswell Gardens still had dew on it. You could see it sparkling along the edges where the sun hadn't reached yet. The air smelled like cut grass and warm bread, because there was a little bakery cart parked near the south gate, and the man running it kept calling out prices in this cheerful, sing-song way that made you smile without meaning to. There were tourists everywhere, but not in a crushing way. Not yet. Families mostly. A school group in matching yellow caps, all holding a rope so they wouldn't wander off. An old couple feeding pigeons even though the signs clearly said not to. A young woman jogging with one earphone in. Two men arguing softly about which way the palace was, both of them holding phones, both of them wrong. I bought a coffee. My wife, Anna, bought a tea and a pastry she instantly regretted because it was mostly air and sugar. Our daughter, Lily, who was 6 at the time, was busy being 6, which meant she was busy with everything except the things we wanted her to look at. "Daddy, can I see the soldiers?" "In a minute, love." "You said a minute 10 minutes ago." She wasn't wrong, she usually wasn't. So we walked toward the palace. Whitstone Palace, big and pale and serious, with that black iron fence running along the front and the little stone guard boxes set back behind it. And there they were, the Havern-foot guards, red tunics, tall dark caps, rifles held at exactly the same angle like someone had measured it with a ruler. They didn't move. They didn't blink near enough. There's something almost unreal about it the first time you see it up close. You half expect them to be statues, and then one of them does the slow march, that strange, stiff walk where the heel comes down hard and the whole thing echoes off the stone. And you remember, oh right, those are people. Real people. Standing there in the heat in wool coats, sweating, while strangers take photos afoot from their faces. I felt a bit sorry for them, to be honest. There was one young lad in particular, closest to where we stood. Couldn't have been much past 22, 23. Pale, freckled, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on some point across the road that only he could see. People kept stepping in front of him, pulling faces, leaning in for selfies. A teenager waved a hand right in front of his nose to try and make him flinch. He didn't. Not a muscle. I remember thinking, that's a hard way to earn a living. Standing still while the world pokes at you. I didn't know his name then. I learned it later. Everyone did. Private Samuel Reed, Sam. But that morning, he was just the young one. The one with the freckles and the straight back and the eyes that didn't move. Anna was reading the little plaque on the fence. Lily was tugging my sleeve, pointing at the toy cart. And I was sipping my coffee and thinking about absolutely nothing important, which, looking back, was a kind of luxury I didn't know I had. Then I noticed the girl. I want to be careful how I say this because so much got said afterward that wasn't true, and I don't want to add to it. So I'll just tell you what I saw. There was a side gate, a smaller one off to the right, where the palace grounds met the edge of the park. And through it, walking out onto the wide stone path, came a little girl, maybe 7, in a pale blue coat, the kind with a velvet collar that rich children wear and the rest of us only see in films. She had her hair in two neat plaits and she was holding the hand of a woman, a nanny, or an aide, someone in a smart gray dress who looked like she ironed her own sleeves every morning. I didn't know who the girl was at first. I genuinely didn't. There were enough well-dressed children in that part of the city that one more didn't make me look twice. But other people knew. I heard the murmur start before I understood it. A ripple. People near the gate going quiet, then leaning toward each other, then lifting their phones. "That's the princess," Anna whispered, suddenly gripping my arm. That's actually her. Princess Marin, the little one. The one the whole kingdom had a soft spot for because she'd once curtsied to a guard dog by mistake on live television and refused to be embarrassed about it. 7 years old and already more poised than most adults I knew. And there she was, 20 feet from us, walking along the path with her nanny on what I assume was meant to be a quiet morning out before the crowds got thick. A treat, maybe. A normal thing for a child to want to go and see the park and the soldiers, same as my Lily. The two of them stood close together for a second, Princess and my own daughter, separated by a low fence and a few feet of grass and an enormous gap in fortune. Lily waved. The princess, bless her, waved back. A small, shy wave. Then she half hid behind the nanny's arm, smiling. I took a photo. I still have it. It's the last normal photo on my phone from that day. After it, the timestamps jump, and there's a long gap where I didn't take anything at all because my hands were busy doing other things. Now here's where I have to slow down, because everything that came next happened fast, much faster than it takes to tell, but inside it, time did that strange thing where it stretches out long and thin, where you notice tiny details you've no business noticing. It was about 9:45, the crowd had thickened. The sun was properly up now and the wool-coated guards must have been cooking. The bakery man was still calling out his prices. A bus hissed somewhere behind us, pigeons. A child crying about an ice cream, ordinary noise, the soundtrack of a normal day. And then the ground moved. I don't have a better word for it. The ground moved. There was a sound first. No, that's wrong. The sound and the feeling came together like they were the same thing, a deep, flat, enormous thud that I felt in my chest more than I heard with my ears. It came from somewhere to the north, past the trees, over toward the far side of the park where the road ran along the edge. Not close, not right on top of us, but close enough. The pigeons went up all at once, the whole flock, a gray explosion of wings. For half a second nobody moved. That's the part people don't understand unless they've been in it. There's this terrible pause where your brain refuses the information. A loud bang in a city, your first thought is something stupid and ordinary. A lorry dropped something, a building site, a car backfiring, except no car has ever backfired like that. Then the second sound came, a different one, the sound of people understanding. It started as one scream and became all of them. The school group with the yellow caps scattered like the pigeons, the rope dropped, teachers grabbing at small arms. The old couple who'd been feeding birds stood frozen. The jogger pulled her earphone out and just stared north with her mouth open. And the crowd, the big, slow, happy holiday crowd, turned in one body and began to run. Toward us, toward the palace. Because that's what people do. They run from the bang, and the bang was north, so south they came, all of them, a wall of bodies suddenly moving the wrong way down a path built for strolling. I grabbed Lily. I don't even remember deciding to. 1 second she was beside me. The next she was off the ground and clamped against my chest with my arm under her like a seatbelt. And Anna had a fistful of my jacket. And we were being shoved sideways by people who weren't looking where they were going because they were looking back over their shoulders at the smoke. There was smoke now, a column of it gray-black rising over the tree line to the north, thin at first then fatter, the kind of smoke that doesn't come from anything good. Somebody near me was shouting, "Bomb!" "It's a bomb," in this flat, panicked voice over and over, and I wanted to tell him to stop saying it because Lily could hear, but I couldn't get any words out. My mouth had gone completely dry. I've never felt anything like it. Dry as paper. And in the middle of all this, the running, the screaming, the smoke, the dropped coffees and the trampled pastries and one lost yellow cap rolling along the stone, in the middle of all of it, I looked back toward the palace fence. And the guards hadn't moved. I need you to understand what that looked like, because I'll never forget it as long as I live. The whole world was running. Grown men were shoving children. People were screaming into phones. The crowd had become an animal, a single frightened thing with 1,000 legs. And there behind the black iron fence in their red coats and tall caps, the guards stood exactly as they had a minute before. Still, straight, rifles at the same angle, eyes on the same far point. The young one, Sam, right at the front, closest to the gate the princess had come out of. He didn't run, he didn't even turn his head. I remember a man, big fellow, red-faced, panicking, actually grabbed at the fence near him and yelled something, yelled at him to do something, to run, to help, I don't know what. And Sam didn't so much as glance at him. His jaw was tight. There was sweat running down the side of his face from under the cap, but he stood. At the time, God forgive me, my first thought was anger. I thought, what is wrong with these men? People are dying, maybe, just over there, and they're playing soldiers, standing like ornaments while the city burns. I didn't understand yet. I didn't understand what standing meant, what it was protecting. Because here's the thing I'd missed in all the chaos. Here's the thing my eyes only caught up to a few seconds later, when the first wave of the crowd had crashed past us, and I could finally see the open ground near the side gate again. The princess was still there. Princess Marin, 7 years old, pale blue coat, 2 neat plaits, still out on the path near the gate, exactly where she'd been when the world was normal. But she was alone now. The nanny, the woman in the smart gray dress, was down, on the ground. I couldn't see clearly from where I was. There were still people between us, but I could see enough. The woman was on the stone, one arm out, not getting up. Whether she'd fallen or been knocked down by the crowd or fainted from shock, I didn't know. I just knew she was down, and the little girl was standing over her, on her own, in the middle of a stampede with smoke in the sky behind her. And the child wasn't screaming. That's what got me. Every other child in that park was screaming. But the princess just stood there, very small and very still, looking down at the woman on the ground and then looking up, and her eyes found the guards. She looked at the guards. I think, and I've turned this over 1,000 times, I think in that moment she did the most natural thing a frightened child can do. She looked for the strongest, calmest, most certain thing in sight. And in a park full of running, screaming, falling grown-ups, the only thing standing still and certain was a line of men in red coats. She looked at them, she looked at the closest one, at Sam. And then she started toward him. Now I have to stop and tell you something about how that ground was laid out, because it matters. The guards stood behind the fence, yes, but the side gate, the one the princess had come out of, was open. There was a gap, a way through. The crowd hadn't found it because the crowd was funneling down the main path, away from the smoke, not toward the palace itself. But the gap was there. And the princess, small enough to slip between the surging adults, made for it. I lost sight of her for a second behind a knot of running people. My heart stopped. I genuinely felt it stop. I was clutching my own daughter and watching a stranger's child vanish into a stampede, and there was nothing I could do, because if I let go of Lily for 1 second, she'd be swept away too. That's the helplessness I can't describe properly. The choice that isn't a choice. You hold your own, that's all you can do. You hold your own and you pray for everyone else's. And then the crowd thinned for half a heartbeat and I saw her again. And what I saw made the breath go out of me. Sam had moved. Not run, not panicked. He'd come off his post, the one thing they're never ever meant to do, the thing I'd watched him refuse to do even when a grown man screamed in his face, and he'd taken 3 long strides toward the open side gate, toward the gap, and he'd dropped down onto one knee on the stone. Right at the edge of the chaos. Rifle still in one hand, the other arm reaching out low and wide, the way you'd reach for a child who was about to step into traffic. And the princess ran into him. Not into his arms, exactly. She sort of collided with him, the way small children do when they're running scared and they reach something solid. She hit his outstretched arm and his shoulder, and she grabbed 2 fistfuls of that red wool tunic and she held on. And Sam, this young lad who hadn't moved a muscle in 20 minutes of strangers mocking him, Sam folded his arm around her, put his whole body between her and the running crowd, turned his shoulder into it like a man bracing against a wave, and held her there on the ground, low and safe, against his chest. I heard later from people closer than me that he said something to her, just a few words, quiet, steady. Nobody agrees exactly what. Some say, "I've got you." Some say, "You're safe, you're safe." One woman swore he said, "Good girl, you found me, you did the right thing." I don't know which is true. I was too far to hear. But I saw his mouth move, and I saw the little girl's grip on his tunic loosen just slightly, just a fraction, the way a child relaxes when an adult finally takes charge. And I thought that's why they stand still, so that when everything is moving, there's one fixed point left in the world, one thing a frightened child can run to and know it won't run away. The smoke was still climbing behind the trees. Sirens were starting now, far off, getting closer. The crowd was still pouring past. Somewhere a woman was screaming a name over and over, a man's name, the same 2 syllables, and it cut through everything. But for 1 second in all of that, there was a man in a red coat on one knee on the stone, with a small girl in a blue coat held tight against his chest, and the 2 of them were the only still thing in a moving world. I'd love to tell you that was the end of it. That help arrived, the child was safe, everyone went home. It wasn't the end, it was barely the start. Because the princess, once she'd caught her breath, once she felt safe enough to speak, looked up at Sam and said something. And whatever she said made his whole face change. I watched it happen even from where I stood. I watched a calm man go pale. She was pointing, back the way she'd come. Back toward the palace gate, the quiet one, the one nobody was looking at because everybody was looking north at the smoke. She was pointing, and she was telling him something, and her small hand, the one that had been gripping his tunic, her small hand was red. I could see it from there, red on her palm, red on the pale blue sleeve. And it wasn't hers, a King's Guard story having series. Red on her palm, red on the pale blue sleeve, and the way she was pointing back at the quiet gate, the one nobody was watching, it wasn't the pointing of a child who'd hurt herself. It was the pointing of a child who'd seen something. I keep coming back to that. A grown adult in that much fear and noise half the time can't string a sentence together, but children are honest in a way that cuts straight through. She didn't have the words to explain it properly. She just pointed and held up her red hand and said the thing again, whatever it was, until the man understood. And he understood. I saw it land on him. You know how sometimes you can watch a thought arrive on a person's face, like weather coming in over a field? That. His jaw, which had been clenched the whole time, went slack for just a second. His eyes flicked from the child's hand to the quiet gate, to the smoke in the north, and then back to the gate. And I swear I could see him doing the maths the rest of us hadn't even started. Because here's what the rest of us were thinking, every single one of us in that running crowd. We were thinking, bomb north, smoke, run south. That was the whole of it. The danger was over there behind the trees where the smoke was, so you ran the other way. Simple, animal, correct, even. But the child had come from the quiet gate, the south gate, the one behind the guards away from the smoke, and her hand was red. And she was pointing back at it, not at the north where everyone's eyes were glued. The blood wasn't from the bang in the north. The blood was from behind them, from the place everyone had their back turned to. I didn't work all that out in the moment, you understand. I'm telling it to you cleaner than I lived it. In the moment, I just saw a guard go pale and turn his head toward a gate nobody was watching, and I felt the hair go up on my arms without knowing why. Sam looked down at the princess. He said something quick, low, and then he did the second thing he was never supposed to do. He picked her up, scooped her clean off the stone with the arm that wasn't holding the rifle, settled her on his hip the way you'd carry any frightened 7-year-old, and stood up to his full height. And for one frozen second, this picture existed that I don't think the kingdom had ever seen. A Havern-foot guard, in full dress, tall cap and red tunic, standing in the middle of a stampede with a princess on his hip and a rifle in his other hand, and an expression on his face like a man who has just realized the fire isn't where everyone's looking. He turned, not toward the safe direction, toward the quiet gate. And he called out. I'd never heard one of them speak before. You forget they can. 20 minutes I'd watched this lad be silent as stone, and now his voice came out and it was louder than I expected, and steadier, cutting clean across the noise. Sergeant Southgate, Southgate now. I didn't even know there was a sergeant, but there was. Of course there was. There's always more of them than you see. From somewhere behind the guard boxes, from inside the grounds, 3 more red coats appeared at a flat run, actual running now. No slow march, no ceremony, boots hammering the stone, and one of them, older, broader, with a different band on his sleeve, reached Sam first. I couldn't hear what passed between them. Too far, too loud. But I saw Sam say a handful of words and tip his head toward the gate, and I saw the sergeant's face do exactly what Sam's had done a moment before. That weather coming in. Understanding. The sergeant turned and barked something at the other 2, and they peeled off, one toward the gate, one back toward the boxes, presumably to get on the radio to call it in, whatever it is they do. And the sergeant himself reached out for the princess. And here's a small thing that stayed with me. Sam didn't just hand her over. He started to, and then the little girl made a noise and clung tighter, fists back in the red wool, and Sam stopped. He looked at the sergeant. The sergeant looked at the child. And the sergeant gave this short nod, keep her then, and Sam shifted her higher on his hip and kept her, and the 2 men moved toward the gate together, the sergeant first. They let a frightened child decide who carried her. In the middle of all that, I think about that more than almost anything else from that day. Now, the crowd was still pouring south, but it had thinned where we stood, because the densest part had already swept past and was bottlenecking further down the path. Anna and I had been pushed up against the iron fence, near a stone planter, and we'd sort of wedged ourselves there, in the lee of it, out of the worst of the flow. Lily was still clamped to my chest with her face buried in my neck. I could feel her heart going like a bird's. I kept saying nonsense to her. I've got you, we're all right. The same few words over and over, and I understood, standing there, exactly what Sam had said to the princess, because it's the only thing there is to say. You just tell them you've got them. You make your voice flat and sure even when it's a lie, because the flatness is the gift. From where we were wedged, I had a clear line to the south gate, closer than I wanted if I'm honest, and I watched the guards go in. The gate gave onto a sort of walled service yard. I learned the layout afterward from the reports, a quiet corner of the grounds where deliveries came in, where the public never went. That's where the princess had been before. That's the quiet morning out, not the public path at all, but this tucked-away yard with its own little garden, where a royal child could get some air without 1,000 phones in her face. And that's where the blood was. I didn't see the worst of it. I want to say that plainly because I've heard versions of this story where the teller claims to have seen everything, and they're either lying or they were somewhere I wasn't. I saw the gate. I saw the guards go through it. I saw what came back out. The middle part, the part inside the yard, I only know from the men who were in it and were willing much later to say a little. What I saw was this. Sam went through the gate with the princess on his hip and the sergeant beside him. They were gone from view for maybe 40 seconds. 40 seconds is a very long time when you're holding your breath, and I was holding my breath. The whole park was, the ones of us who'd stopped running and turned to look. There's a kind of person who runs and a kind who stops and turns, and I discovered that morning which kind I was, and I wasn't proud of either. Then a sound came out of the yard. Not an explosion. A shout. A man's shout, sharp, the kind that's an order and an alarm at the same time. And then more boots and a crackle of radio, and then the sergeant came back through the gate at a run, and he was carrying someone. A man, a grown man in the dark trousers and pale shirt of palace staff, a gardener or a groundsman by the look of him, with gray in his hair. The sergeant had him over one shoulder in that way they're trained to carry a body, and the man's arm was hanging down, and his sleeve and the side of his shirt, that was the red. That was where the blood was from, not the bomb, not the princess. This man. I learned his name too, eventually. Mr. Hale. He'd worked the palace grounds for 31 years. He'd been with the princess that morning, him and the nanny, showing her the early roses in the service garden because she liked the white ones. A perfectly ordinary, gentle thing. An old gardener showing a small girl some flowers. What happened in that yard in the seconds when the bomb went off in the north, that took longer to piece together, and some of it never got pieced together at all, not in any way they'd say out loud. Here's what they did say in the end. The blast in the north hadn't been the whole of it. It had been a distraction. A loud thing in an obvious place, designed to do exactly what it did: send 1,000 people stamping, turn every eye and every camera and every guard's attention north, create a wall of chaos so that something quieter could happen south. In the yard, near the gate the public never watched, near a royal child the kingdom adored. I'm not going to dress it up or make it more dramatic than it was, because the truth is dramatic enough, and the man it happened to deserves better than embroidery. There was a second person in that yard who should not have been. Mr. Hale, the old gardener, 31 years on those grounds, had put himself between that person and the princess. That's why he was bleeding. That's why his shirt was red. That's why a 7-year-old's hand came away red when she touched him, when she knelt down by him before she ran, because she'd knelt down by him first. This small girl, before she ran for the guards, she'd stopped and touched the man who was hurt. That's the part that broke me when I finally understood it. The order of things. The bang goes off. The world runs. A child, alone, watches a kind old man fall down protecting her. She kneels by him. She gets his blood on her hand. And then she doesn't scream, she doesn't freeze, she does the most extraordinary thing. She gets up and she runs not away from the danger but straight toward the only adults still standing, the men in red, and she finds the closest one and she grabs his coat and she points back and shows him her red hand and makes him understand. Back there. Someone's hurt back there. The bad thing isn't where you're looking. It's behind you. 7 years old. People made a lot afterward of the guard, and rightly. I'll get to him. But I have never once let myself forget that the first action that morning, the first brave, clear-headed, life-saving action was taken by a child in a blue coat, and everything the grown men did, they did because she told them to. Anyway, the sergeant came out with the gardener over his shoulder, and right behind him came Sam, still with the princess, and behind Sam came the third guard, and between them they had hold of someone else, the person who shouldn't have been there, and I'll not say more about that part, because it's not my story to tell and the courts told it later well enough. The guards had hold of him. That's all that matters. The danger in the yard was over. It had been over, I think, almost before most of the crowd had finished running. It just took the rest of us a long time to understand that the real thing had happened in the quiet place, while we were all busy being afraid of the loud one. Sirens were close now, properly close. The first response vehicle came up over the curb at the north end of the park, lights going and then another, and the world started filling up with the people whose job it is to arrive. Paramedics. The sergeant laid Mr. Hale down on the grass, gentle as anything, and one of the paramedics was on him in seconds, and I watched them working and I couldn't tell from where I was whether the old man was alive or not. His hand wasn't moving. That's all I could see, his hand on the grass not moving. And in the middle of all the arriving and the shouting and the radios, Sam stood there with the princess. She still wouldn't let go of him. The The sergeant had tried again, gently, and a woman had arrived, an aide, someone official in a state about the child, and they all wanted to take her, of course they did. Get her inside, get her safe, get her away from all of it. And the princess would not be taken. She had her arms locked round Sam's neck and her face pressed into the red wool of his collar, and she would not look up and she would not let go. So they let her stay there. 3 or 4 grown-ups stood around this one young guard and waited, while a 7-year-old decided she was ready. And Sam, God, the steadiness of him, Sam just held her. Stood there with his rifle slung now, both arms around the child, and he was talking to her, low and constant, that flat, sure voice, and slowly, slowly you could see her loosen. Same as before. Same as when she'd first hit his arm by the gate. The grip easing, a fraction at a time. I'll tell you the moment I lost it. The moment I stopped being a witness and became just a bloke standing in a park crying into his own daughter's hair. The princess lifted her head off Sam's collar, and she held up her hand, the red one, and she said something to him. And he looked at her hand, and then he did the simplest thing. He took his own white glove off, the ceremonial one, peeled it off his hand with his teeth because his other arm was full of child, and he used it to wipe her palm clean. Careful, like a dad cleaning a graze. This 19-stone wall of a man who hadn't blinked while strangers mocked him for half an hour, gently wiping blood off a little girl's hand with his dress glove, in the middle of the worst morning that Park had ever seen. And then he tucked the glove away out of her sight so she wouldn't have to look at it, and he said something that made her finally nod, a small nod into his collar. And only then, when she nodded, did he let the aide take her. He passed her across so carefully, both hands, the way you'd pass something that could break, and the princess went at last into the arms of the woman who'd come for her, and was carried in through the gate toward the palace, toward safety, toward whatever happens to royal children after the worst morning of their lives. And just before she disappeared through the gate, she looked back, over the aide's shoulder. She looked back and she found Sam in the crowd of red coats, and she lifted one hand, the clean one now, and gave him that same small, shy wave she'd given my Lily 20 minutes and a whole lifetime ago. And Private Samuel Reed, who was not allowed to move, who was not allowed to speak, who was not allowed to so much as blink at a teenager waving in his face. He lifted his bare hand, the one without the glove, and he waved back, a King's Guard story Havern series. We didn't go home that day. I mean, we didn't go back to the hotel for hours. You can't after something like that. There's nowhere to put yourself. The police closed off half the park and herded the rest of us into a side street, and we stood there in clumps, strangers, all of us, holding cups of water that somebody handed round, none of us drinking them, just holding them. You needed something to hold. Anna had Lily now. They'd swapped at some point the way you do, passing the child back and forth like the heaviest, most precious thing in the world, which she was. Lily had stopped crying. She'd gone quiet instead, which was worse. She kept asking in this small voice whether the soldier was all right. Not the princess, the soldier. In her 6-year-old way, she decided the man in the red coat was the most important person in the whole thing. And I didn't have it in me to tell her she was wrong, because I wasn't sure she was. It was hours before we knew anything about Mr. Hale. The gardener, the man on the grass whose hand wasn't moving. For most of that day, in my head, he was dead. I'd convinced myself. The not moving hand, the amount of red on that grass, the way the paramedics had worked, I'd filed him privately in the column of people who didn't make it, and I'd started already the quiet grief you feel for a stranger whose name you don't even know yet. He didn't die. I want to say that plainly and early, the way nobody got to say it to me that day. Mr. Hale lived. It was bad, it was very bad, and he was a long time mending, and the report said afterward that the first responders and the sergeant's quick carry made the difference between the column he nearly ended up in and the one he stayed in. But he lived. 31 years on those grounds, and a 32nd on the way, and an old man who showed a little girl the white roses because she liked them best, and put himself between her and harm without, by all accounts, a half-second's hesitation. When I read that he'd pulled through, weeks later, sitting at my own kitchen table 1,000 miles from that park, I cried again. Same as in the park. You'd think I'd have run out by then. You don't, it turns out. There's always more. The footage got out, of course. There's no such thing as a quiet morning anymore, not in a city, not with 1,000 phones. By that evening it was everywhere. Not the bad parts, the police kept a lid on the worst of it, the yard, the man they'd taken, the things no one needed to see. But the other footage, the crowd footage, shot shaky and sideways by tourists like me, from a dozen angles, all showing the same thing. The guards who didn't run. That was the headline at first, the discipline of it, the line of red coats standing firm while a city stampeded. And I'll be honest, when I first saw it framed that way, it sat wrong with me because I remembered my own first reaction, the anger, the why won't you move, people are dying. I remembered thinking they were ornaments. And here was the whole kingdom calling them heroes for standing still. And I kept wanting to grab people by the collar and say, you don't understand. The standing still wasn't the brave part. The standing still was the job. The brave part was when he broke it. But then the other clip surfaced. The one a woman near the gate had caught, steadier than most, and it showed it. It showed Sam come off his post. It showed him take the 3 strides and drop to one knee and open his arm. It showed the princess run into him and grab the wool and hold on. It showed him fold himself around her and put his shoulder into the crowd. And after that, nobody needed me to explain anything. The kingdom understood it on its own. The thing that made him a guard wasn't that he stood still. It was that he knew to the exact second, when standing still was no longer the job, and he moved toward the danger, not away from it, with a rifle in one hand and a child in the other. They worked out who he was within a day. Private Samuel Reed, 23. From a town up north that nobody outside it had ever heard of until that week, when suddenly everybody had. His mum got interviewed on her front step. His old schoolteachers said the things old schoolteachers say. The whole machine of it cranked up around this young man who, by every account, wanted absolutely nothing to do with any of it. He didn't speak for weeks. The palace put out the careful statements they put out, the regiment said the regiment's bit, and Sam himself stayed silent, which, when you think about it, was the most Sam thing he could possibly have done. The man's entire training, his entire being, was about not reacting, about being the still point. And now the loudest noise the kingdom had made in years was all pointed at him, and he just stood in it, quiet, the way he'd stood in the park. There was a ceremony, eventually, a medal. I won't pretend I understand the names of the honors. There were words read out, and the king himself, and Mr. Hale was there in a wheelchair with a blanket over his knees and tears running down his face that he didn't bother to wipe. They gave the old gardener something too, and rightly. And the princess, Princess Marin, 7 years old, pale blue coat traded now for something formal and stiff that didn't suit her half as well. The princess was there, holding her mother's hand, watching the man who'd held her. And the one time Sam spoke, the only time that I ever saw it, was at that ceremony, and it was 3 sentences, and a reporter caught it on the way out, and it ran everywhere because of course it did. The reporter asked him the obvious thing, how does it feel? The hero, the brave guard, all of that. And Sam stopped, and he looked for a second like he might just walk on, the way he'd walked past everything for weeks. But then he didn't. He turned to the reporter and he said, and I'm giving it to you the way the footage has it, near enough word for word, because I've watched it more times than I'll admit. He said, I didn't save anyone. The gardener saved her. He did the hard part before any of us got there. And then, she saved herself near enough. She kept her head when grown men lost theirs. And then the last thing, the thing that ran as the headline the next morning, the thing my own daughter has framed on her wall now, years later, in that careful child's handwriting she's since grown out of. He said, all I did was be where she could find me. That's the whole job. You just have to be the thing that doesn't run away. And then he put his cap back on and he walked off, and as far as I know, he never gave another interview in his life. You just have to be the thing that doesn't run away. I've turned that over more times than I can count, because at first you hear it and it sounds like modesty, like a brave man making himself small. And it is that. But the longer I sit with it, the more I think it's the truest thing anybody said about that whole morning, and maybe about a lot more than that morning. Think about it. The bomb in the north, that was somebody trying to make the whole world run. That was the entire plan. Make a loud thing, make everyone bolt, and in the chaos, in the running, do the quiet, terrible thing nobody's watching. The whole horror of it depended on people running, on the still points breaking. And it nearly worked. The crowd ran. I ran, or I'd have run if I hadn't been wedged against a planter with a child in my arms. Let me not flatter myself. The world did exactly what it was meant to do. It panicked. It moved. It looked the wrong way. But two people didn't. An old gardener who stood between a child and harm and paid for it with 31 years' worth of his own blood, and a young guard who knew in his bones the exact moment to stop being still and start being fast, and who, even then, when he finally moved toward the gate, toward the danger, toward the small hand reaching for his coat. And one child who is the truest still point of the lot when you really look at it, because she's the one who, in a park full of running, screaming adults, knelt down by a hurt old man and then ran for help and made the help understand. 7 years old. She was the thing that didn't run away, before any of the grown men were. That's the story. That's all of it the way I actually saw it, with the parts I didn't see filled in by people who did and by the things that came out later. I've tried not to polish it too much. The polishing is how the truth gets lost. The truth is that it was an ordinary Tuesday, and the plan was to watch some men stand still in red coats, and by the end of it I understood, in a way I'll carry to my grave, what the standing still is for. We flew home 2 days later. Lily slept the whole flight, which she never does. Anna held my hand the whole way, which she also never does, not for that long. We didn't talk much. There wasn't much that needed saying. We'd seen the same thing, and we both knew it had changed something in us that we couldn't name yet and maybe never would. Lily's 6-year-old verdict, delivered somewhere over the sea half asleep, was this: the soldier was the best one. And I said yes. Yes, love, he was a good one. But I didn't tell her because she was 6, and because it was too much for the air over an ocean, that I didn't actually think the soldier was the best one. I think the best one was a small girl in a blue coat who knelt down in the blood and then got up and ran the right way. And I think the soldier would say the same. I think he did say the same, near enough, on the steps that day, in 3 sentences, before he put his cap back on and disappeared. I still have the photo, the last normal one. 2 little girls waving at each other over a low fence, one of them mine, one of them a princess, neither of them knowing what the next 20 minutes held. I look at it sometimes. I don't know why. It's just 2 children waving. There's nothing in it. The smoke isn't in it yet. The screaming isn't in it. The blood isn't in it. The man on one knee on the stone isn't in it. That's exactly why I keep it, I think. Because for one more second in that photo, the world is still the kind of place where the worst thing that can happen to you is an overpriced pastry made mostly of air. And then it isn't. People ask me when I do tell it what the lesson is, as if there has to be one, as if a morning like that owes you a tidy thing to take away. I don't know that it does, but if you made me, I'd say this. We spend our whole lives running, from the loud things mostly. The obvious things, the things with smoke over them that everyone can see. And while we're all running from those, the real harm so often comes from the quiet corner nobody's watching, and it's only ever stopped by the people who didn't run. The gardener who stood, the guard who knew when to move and which way, the child who knelt down. So that's what I think about now, years on, whenever something loud goes off in my life, and every part of me wants to bolt. I think about a man in a red coat on one knee on the stone. And I try, God help me, I try to be the thing that doesn't run away.